A little bit of burnt umber. A little bit of yellow ochre. A bit of raw sienna. A little bit of cadmium orange, very expensive nowadays. A very little itty bitty amount of cad red, maybe a little bit more than that orange. Anything with cadmium is pretty expensive. It's also not that healthy when it comes to human contact. Some more. A little bit of cad yellow. We have our sap green. Bam. A little bit of ultramarine blue. Payne's gray. I think I cracked this when I was out in the freezing cold painting on plein air. All right. Or to put some duct tape on there or something. I don't know. I might incorporate some black into this just to get some of the darker grays that I want to get. Try to avoid it though. And then our titanium white. Need a fair amount of that. We have an 11 by 14 canvas we're going to be working with, so I need a little bit more paint than the last few paintings have required. And do a little scene based upon what I saw while I was walking the dog this morning. So we'll see how that goes. There we go. Took a couple of pictures. Here's a decent one. You can kind of make out. I'll try to put that image throughout the video, probably toward the upper right hand corner. And I'm very loosely going to base this painting on that scene. As you probably saw, I'm also using as my solvent linseed oil, and that's it. I'll go ahead and with this medium-sized filbert, I'm gonna use some very, very loose, wet Payne's gray and maybe a little bit of burnt umber, just to put some marks, some basic marks. Halfway point, halfway point, halfway point, halfway point. I'm going to avoid, hopefully inadvertently, centering anything. There's a large land mass here, which is kind of like the cliff, if you will. It's going to come off. One of my neighbors just has a beautiful property where they could see for miles all kinds of ridges. They can see the lake within our community. There's another little point here where there's kind of some mulch and pine needles. And I can also see the Delaware Water Gap off in the distance. little bit more than halfway here. There's a ridge which kind of comes up like so. And then way off in the distance we have this one blued out, but we have full of purple, and that we're going to use. It's going to be a grayish purple. So I got Payne's gray. I already have a little pool of ultramarine blue. I'm going to pull in some cad red. We're going to need a lot of this when it comes time to put the trees in. So I'm going to mix up a bunch of it now. This is going to be the hue that we use to block in the darkest tones. Put a little bit of burnt umber in there. And just mix that up. A little bit more burnt umber. Get a little bit of linseed oil and get it in there and loosen it up a little bit. I'm doing this now because the tendency will be for me to get into the painting, get all the other elements set up, and then I'll forget about this, and I'll end up with a much higher chance of having muddy, weaker colors, and we don't want that here. So, and maybe perhaps even a situation where there's not enough paint. So we're going to avoid that and make sure there's plenty of this dark purpley gray, and that'll be used just to show you as the base color for these trees. This nice dark color, which we'll use to build upon when we start trying to layer in texture. We'll build upon that foundational color there. Wipe off my palette knife, set it aside. Okay. And what we will do is we'll start putting in the sky, and we'll work back from the greatest distance. And I know I have a nice round brush here somewhere. Let's see. Aha, here we go. I'm gonna wipe this out. Get a little linseed oil in there, wipe it again. All right, so we are going to first start with a very light grayish blue. A lot of white, a little bit of ultramarine blue, a little bit of linseed oil, a little bit of Payne's gray, a lot of white. Titanium white tends to be among the stiffer paints right out of the tube, so a little extra oil is okay when you're dealing with this kind of color. Now, we're going to go ahead and we're going to split this sky area just about in half. I'm not too worried about erasing all or part of these tree shapes that I put in. Just scrub it in and get this sky, top of the sky covered. And this scene was from early this morning. You know, we're in late December here in the Northeast, so you know, 7 a.m. or so is when the sun rises for the most part in these short days near the solstice. And have a nice blue ridge in the top of the sky. And I missed the peak of the color because our little dog just doesn't walk very fast. I'm gonna wipe some of this off. That a little too far, but that's okay. It'll blend nicely with the red I'm about to add. We're about to get real busy with baseball, soccer, work, school, everything, so moments like this where there's a little extra, some gaps in the time here, just trying to take advantage of it. And that's why you've seen me post more and paint more. Let's see. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and use this flatter brush. It's got a little bit of, looks like yellow. It's a long-haired flat brush, which has been really beat up. Got a little yellow pigment in there. Looks like yellow ochre mostly. I'm going to go into my cad red, mix it with my cad orange here, mostly cad red. And we're going to go ahead and just stain the canvas. Get a little bit of white in there, not too much. A little bit of yellow ochre. There we go. And we're going to go ahead and just plunk that in. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just basically is going to go down to the horizon line, to the mountain. You know, when it mixes with that blue paint, it's gonna get a little purple. It's gonna get a little more orange as we go off to the right. That's just what we saw. A little more oil. Bleeds into that blue, that's totally fine. We get like a pinkish purple. And we'll play with those edges a little bit. Set this off to the side. We'll use that brush again. We're going to get a fresh piece of paper towel. We'll wipe out our dry, relatively new, inexpensive 2-inch, 2.5-inch chip brush, and just come through and soften some of these edges and distort this image a little bit. Picking up some paint. We don't necessarily want that, but I'm going to let it slide for now, because I think when we're going to come through again and make a second pass through the sky, inevitably to cut sky holes in and play with the edges, we'll be able to fix this. Anything that just doesn't seem right, we'll be able to fix. So for now, I'm not too worried about the colors kind of bleeding together here. Okay. All right. Good. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and use the sky color that I have on this brush, and we're gonna work up a lavender tinted version of that. That's going to be a little more saturated, not a lot. So there'll be a fair amount of white in it and a fair amount of this blue. We'll come up with a color that is intended to indicate the distant mountain ridge that makes up the Delaware Water Gap, essentially. We'll have a bluer version of it that will also desaturate even more. I'll put a little Payne's gray in there. So this should be a little grayed out. There we go. That's close. One more white. One more Payne's gray. One more Payne's gray. There we go. And linseed oil. There you go. All right. And we'll go ahead and that's a little too saturated and a little too purple. So I'm put quite a bit more white and blue and quite a bit more Payne's gray in there. And quite a bit of oil too. There we go. This will be a little better. Yep, a little better, a little better. I'm gonna wipe some of that off, and we're gonna put a whole bunch of different shapes within this main shape, but just getting this in a little darker than it will be. I'm not too worried about it being 100% accurate. Just want to get the big shapes in. We'll wipe and scrape and do some dry brushing and maybe even some scrumbles and glazes later on to get it right. But for this quick little 40-minute to 1 hour session that I intend to have here, this will more than suffice. Okay. Now we're gonna take that same batch of color and we're gonna right around the edges of this puddle here. I'm gonna try and show you by tilting my camera again. I have this puddle of lavender that I used for the water gap. I'm gonna use Payne's gray. I'm gonna add that in and create a grayer version, and then further out I'm going to incorporate a little bit of, and I'm just using the same brush, sap green. Okay, and a little bit more of the gray, a little bit more of the blue, a little bit more of the red. So we'll have like a purpley greenish gray. How's that for color science? All right, so we have light blue, light purpley blue, grayed out version of the purpley blue, easy for me to say, and then a greenish version. Those are the colors essentially we're going to use for the mid ground. distant midground and near midground. And we'll go into much warmer colors as we get closer. All right. So now I'm gonna wipe this brush out real quick. And we're gonna go into the blue. And we're going to get a slightly bluer version of this purple going. As well. Maybe a little too blue there. There we go. Some of that incorporated. And we'll just keep going with that. We're going to wipe some of that off. Actually, we're going to wipe a considerable amount of that off. Just want to make sure that the paint doesn't get so thick, especially when it has this much oil in it, that I'm not able to add additional layers on top of it. If it looks splotchy and uneven, that's totally fine. We're going to use that to create the illusion of detail off in the distance, hopefully just the right amount. And I might have made those ridges a little too tall. We can knock them down. And we put the final touches in. From this vantage point, these ridges are pretty far away. We will knock them down. Hopefully that helps a little bit too. With sometimes some interesting things happen when we push and pull different edges. Just going to wipe some of that excess paint off to help with that process. This is part of the process. It's taking a little longer than I anticipated. Oftentimes, the beginning will. And once we get the whole canvas covered, it tends to accelerate. So hopefully that'll be the case for us. Use the same brush. It's got a little bit of that lavender in there. I'm going to go right into my greenish grayish purpley color. A little bit of linseed oil added in. And I'm going to go ahead and just quickly scrub in this shape. It's kind of got a interesting kind of hue to it. It's in shadow, so we're not really seeing a lot of cast light in this area. And we're not going to have a real sharp edge either. A little bit more on there. A little more oil. And we're going to go ahead and just get this in. And we're going to leave the bottom here a little lighter. That's where Blue Mountain Lake actually is. So we're just going to leave that. And we're going to try and create natural looking rough edge here. Where this kind of goes up into that purpley blue area just by using these short abrupt strokes. Bring it down a little bit more here on this side. There, we're gonna dip into almost pure Payne's gray in this area here. It's gonna get a little bit darker. Step back. Now, I'm going to wipe out this brush and I'm going to stick with it here. We're going to go back into the same blue-white color that we used for the sky. And we're going to use this for the most part. It's going to be real light here. We'll lighten it up some more in a bit. Maybe a couple of gradients of light and gray in this area here. That's where our lake is located. We're going to go ahead and create a little mud here and just pull down. I'm kind of leaving a little bit of a mystery where the shoreline is there. I'm gonna get some Payne's gray. We'll go ahead and still leaving it a bit of a mystery, but we're gonna put some dark areas in. Good. You know what I might do here? I'm gonna use some of this blue, Payne's gray, a little bit of red, nice dark gray lavender. We're going to go ahead and just selectively lay some of that in on this side, a little more liberally. And go ahead and get some blue. We'll put that in there as well. Just haphazardly get some striations, some lines in there. just want to size up some of my bigger shapes here and make sure that what I originally had in mind is taking place here. And by and large, I think it is. So I'm good to go forward. I think what I might do while I have it in mind here is get this later color in. It's not a highlight quite so, but it's I just want to make sure that and I'll wipe some of this out and then recover it later when I put some sky holes in. Okay, good. I'll wipe this out. I'll lay this brush over here on my palette. Excellent. Now I'm gonna go ahead and lay in some green. Now, my intention here is to use the green I mixed up, maybe a slightly darker version of it here. So I mixed up this pool of green over here. It's kind of a grayish green. I'll go ahead and get that in and fill in this shape here. Scrub it in. And I'll work in some sap green from time to time too, and that's fine. A little bit of a warmer green, so it'll pull this whole area forward. So we'll get it covered for now. All right. Now, I'm gonna use the same brush. I'm just gonna wipe it out a little bit. And I'm gonna get some almost pure burnt umber, a little bit of green mixed in and blue over in this area. And this is mostly this area is kind of like a mulchy, pine needle-y covered area where we're going to see the land kind of come across and meet up with the grass and serve as the way with which a lot of these trees are going to be anchored into the landscape. Okay. Put some brushes and a nice rock here somewhere along the ways, but for now, this is it. I'll go ahead and get some of my raw sienna and work some of that in as well. And we'll get that some into the grass too. Why not? It's in there. Excellent. Okay. All right. So now we have all of the canvas covered. We're going to lay in some of the tree shapes. And the painting is probably going to look like it's going to hell for a little bit. But fear not, because what will happen if everything works out as planned we'll use the technique of building sky holes for each of these layers: the mid-ground, the lake, the distant mid-ground, the sky, and so forth, to help enhance the illusion of detail further. Before I do that, there are some areas that I want a little tint to this raw sienna, and I just want to pepper it in here, kind of indicative of, you know, maybe some of the mulch falling in. All right, I'll wipe this brush out again. Now my gut's telling me I'll probably have to scrape out some channels to put in some of the tree shapes, but for now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get started with this bigger tree shape here, which I left this little spot pretty wide open. We're going to get the biggest, darkest element in this painting. I'm going to lay in the foundation for it. We'll build some texture in just a little bit, and also some elements which hopefully enhance the mass of this object and the three-dimensional nature of it. Looks pretty flat right now, and that's okay. All right. Make sure this taper is honored here. These trees, one thing they all have in common is, except for a very rare occurrence, they are thicker at the bottom than they are at the top. Pull this up just to make sure that I don't get those nasty bare spots. Yeah, so in the new year, starting next week, we're going to have indoor travel baseball start, our winter workouts. We're going to have all kinds of different sports, winter track, soccer. It all starts next week. So, all right, now we're going to have another group of, I'll put this brush down, trees come up in a couple different spots. So I'm going to use a couple of tools. I'm going to improvise here. I have this cheap palette knife that has these different size edges to it. I'm going to use that. I'm also going to use some of my broken pencils that just aren't working for me. I'm also going to use some wood shavings just to create different size grooves. I'll also use the back of paintbrushes and so forth, but just to create some different size grooves or channels for the tree shapes that I need to put in. So I'm going to just scrape paint off. Go up like that. And I just don't want to fight with the paint that's already on the canvas, if you know what I mean. Sometimes that'll happen. Sometimes this scraping the paint off will just make it easier to lay in the additional layers. I'm going to use this little wedge here. Great. channel by which I could get paint in there. Okay. And we'll do that here as well. Some of the thinner trees that are going to be going in. A few on this side. Will disappear over that edge there for the most part. We'll have one more about this thickness. There'll be all kinds of bent pieces. There'll be another one over here too. Alright, and then we'll go to some thinner shapes here. I'm going to use a palette knife. Oh, that a little brush hair over here. Oof. All right, so those are the main tree shapes that I'm going to lay in. There's going to be a bunch of smaller little things that go in too, but I just wanted to get those in. And I'm going to look for maybe a medium-sized flat brush if I can here, and I'm going to start working in some of this darker paint using this brush. And right along the lines of where these grooves are. We still, even though they're smaller, we still want these shapes to be dark because they are backlit. So they're casting, they're within the own shadow that they're casting. So I tend to do a lot of paintings like this. For a different brush too. There we go. Probably have to get a longer haired brush involved. And I'm not too worried about perfection here at this point. I am not a realist style painter. I am drawn to impressionism and variants of that. Tonalism. Twist the brush as it starts running a little thin on paint. I'm going to enhance this taper here. Some of the edges in there. When you have trees like these that have grown over the years through rocky soil, they tend to, especially the younger guys and girls, I guess, they tend to have some interesting bumps and curves, and when you think about it, they've had to grow up through rocky soil. It hasn't been an easy journey growing up in that sense for them. It's just in their nature to have some bends and twists and bumps and other things that appear to be imperfections. All right, I'm just going to keep going with this. I'm going to darken this quite a bit. Also cool it off a little bit. There. So there's a lot more work to do here, getting these trees in. And once we get a bunch of kind of anchor trees in here, we'll start putting in the little guys. And then some of the branches that run across horizontally, and some of the basic shapes. That'll be indicative of foliage, particularly when it comes to the evergreens, because it is winter here at the time with which this scene is being captured. Well, I certainly hope to do it again in the summer. I'm in a planned community, and it gets a little awkward. I've done some plein air painting, and there's some scenes that are located on lots that are owned by some neighbors, and I've always been tempted to paint and what have you, but I stop short of doing that. I go to usually the common areas and capture the stuff that I end up painting within, you know, within a walk from where we live here. So I'm gonna keep going here, and there's a whole bunch of little guys sticking out from the side of the hill, and then there's, you know, a whole bunch of small guys just crisscrossing here. Some of them will actually be white, so the fact that that little white mark is made there, that's fine. There's a little ochre birch sapling popping up. Maybe a tree dying on its way and is taking on a lighter hue. And I am not going to necessarily honor exactly what is going on in this scene, because my goal is to create an interesting painting and to simplify things. So I will definitely focus on doing that as I kind of make my way through this process here. All right, so I might get a few cooler bluish gray items in here, maybe intended to look, you know, further into the distance. All right. And one of the things we try to do as a painter, make things interesting, is to capture the viewer's eye and kind of channel the way that their eye moves around a particular painting. And that's not going to be an easy task here, but we're going to do the best we can. All right. So we're going to start getting, after we fortify some of these bigger tree shapes a little bit. start putting in some of these angular and horizontal branch shapes. So, we're going to have them come out like this, and like this, come across like that. Excuse me. And I think we have this guy here. We're going to have maybe one come straight up like this, or almost straight. Pick that out. There we go. Just gotta make that one a little thicker. Little thicker. All right. Perfect. So 3 is kind of a magic number in a lot of areas, but in painting composition, groups of 3s, odd numbers in general, when devising composition is a good thing. So we have 3 main tree shapes, 1, 2, 3. We have 3 main background, or 3 main shapes in general: the foreground, the midground, the background, and the sky. 3 groupings of secondary trees off to the left, off to the right, and here in the center. So kind of like the way things are coming together here a little bit. What we really need to work on now, and this might actually take 2 sessions, but is getting these branches in. It's going to be quite a task to create the kind of dynamic that is going on in this scene. We don't necessarily want to be in the business of painting every single shape, but we do want to create almost a lacy effect. These tree branches. So almost an hour in. All right. We're going to go ahead and take this long-haired flat brush here, and I'm realizing I left an area here wide open. I'm not sure why. I think I was thinking I would put a tree in that area. There we go. All right. Yeah, I'm not sure why I did that, but anyway, it's filled in now. I'm going to take a little bit of a break from my trees I'm going to go into a little bit of my yellow ochre and my green that I have up top here. Mix those together a little bit of white. And I'm going to get some patterns starting to build up here in the grass, especially in the foreground. A little bit of a lighter green. Now, we will go ahead and go back to our dark color here and continue to work in some indications of those tree branches within the tree canopy here. We're going to try and direct the viewer's eye as best we can to move throughout the painting. And those branches won't all be at the same angle, so we want to make sure we don't create too many inadvertent patterns. Some of them will go straight across. Or almost straight across. And we're going to erase some elements that we like by accident here, and we'll have to replace them. That's okay. It's just part of the process. Way down here, toward the bottom of this area here, there's going to be so much going on. It's going to diffuse our view and obscure our view of the lake and the trees in the background. We're not going to worry too much about much of anything here. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and use the back of my brush here to create some patterns which will end up getting broken up and covered up. Both in the grass and in this mulchy area. up a little bit. Okay, we're gonna cover a lot of this up. I just want to get some of this texture in there. My thinking is, oftentimes I feel like it helps pull the foreground forward. If there are patterns like this, and again, we'll cover much of this up with more paint, but I just want to get it in there. We're going to do the same thing with at least this main tree. I don't know about the other ones yet, but change the angle of my camera a little bit. I'm going to back up and get this scene most head on. So back up just a little bit, just so you notice there's a little bit of a glare. To avoid that interrupting and interfering with what we're trying to accomplish here. So now what I'm going to do is just in select areas, just put some of this darker paint, reestablish it where it might have been broken up. And I'm also going to get some more ultramarine blue in there, a little bit of linseed oil because it's stiffening up a little bit. And in select areas, we're going to go ahead and thicken up this tree canopy, turning the brush as I go because the paint is interacting with the other paint, and I want this upper right hand corner to be amongst the darkest spots in the scene with the thickest kind of lacy veil. And for the tree canopy, representing the tree canopy. And I'm gonna go ahead and come across with now, get some of this darker color incorporated throughout this area here where some shadows might be cast. And we get a little bit more blue in there. or a little grassy area, and even into the grassy area a little bit. Now, I'm going to wipe out this brush. It's got a lot of cool purpley gray in there. And I'm going to go into my raw sienna and get a little bit of my cadmium red and a little bit of cad orange. And select areas. I'm just going to warm it up a little bit. And I'm going to go into my yellow ochre and do the same thing. Now, there's a couple more things I need to do before we start thinking about incorporating some of those sky holes and taking a closer look at some of the edges. I want to get some shapes that are kind of indicative of evergreens toward the top of this tree and shooting off to the left and the right a little bit. And for that, I am thinking I want to use my fan brush. So I'm going to get some of my raw sienna and my sap green, and I'm going to mix those together. And a pretty thick amount on the brush. And we're going to come across and lift up. And we're going to do that a couple times. That's not quite dark enough. We're going to incorporate some of our dark tree shade color here, the grayish purpley blue, into this mixture of sap green and raw sienna. There we go. We got a little bit of oil in there. It's a little too stiff. A little bit of burnt umber. A little more of our gray. There we go. Blue, a little bit of gray. And maybe there's an evergreen tree here. And maybe there's a few more branches kind of making their way out here. And there's one down here. Yep, there you go. And we'll put some accents and some other things on there, but I'm not going to worry too much about it now. Get some indication of some evergreen type foliage in a couple of spots. There we go. Now, we're going to blue that out a little bit. And we're going to get just a couple of indications of brush and what have you. You know, shadow in here. There we go. All right. Just interesting things will happen when we start putting the sky holes in, especially when we push that middle area back a little bit by introducing maybe some more blue. But before we get to that, what I want to do is I'm going to use this little stubby, frizzly, flat brush. All the trees around here that have been alive for any length of time have some sort of moss on them, usually on the, as the, you know, kind of Cub Scout teaching suggests, usually on the northern end of the tree, but it pretty much wraps its way around the whole thing. It's kind of a bluish green. We're going to get a little indication of that. All along the tree trunk here. Just by roughing in to varying degrees, just an indication of just a little bit of that here and there. And it's not going to be on all the trees to some degree, but the pine trees in particular seem to accumulate a lot. And it can go pretty far up. There we go. And we get a little lighter gray on my brush. It's still going to have a little bit of a green tint to it, and we're just going to make our way on up. Throughout this tree and some others. Just kind of honoring the fact that there's going to be some rough bark in there. All right. We're going to do the same thing though. We're going to get some cool blues, particularly more toward the top. And wherever we think there might be a dark shadow. Okay. All right. I'm going to go in and actually add some of this dark blue. Make sure we use it throughout. We got the thinner brush. We're going to use it to hopefully create some marks that point the viewer's eye inward. All right. Not a bad view to see early in the morning after waking up, walking the dog. All right. Let's see. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to push that midground back a little bit. I am going to get a new brush I got a long-haired round brush. We're going to use some light blues and purples. So just walk our way through where the gaps exist within these trees. Put a real thin coat of this light blue purpley color in select areas, and the intention is to push that back using, it's really atmospheric perspective. I'll get some of it pulled down into the water here too, because that brighter highlight color is just coming up a little too high. So cooler colors will create the illusion of something being further off in the distance, because that's what happens in nature. As an object is looked at or observed through the Earth's atmosphere from a distance, human eye will have a much more difficult time seeing the yellows and the warmer colors. All right. I'm going to make another passage through. This tree. Just with the intention of enhancing the roughness and three-dimensionality. Now, take a little medium-sized filbert here, and I'm going to go ahead and start enhancing some of the color in the sky here. Adding some yellow, and there will inevitably be instances where I inadvertently destroy some of the work that I've done. That's totally okay. It's gonna happen. Within and amongst these trees and so forth. Now when it happens, don't panic. Just wipe out your brush. Get some fresh paint on there. And cover up your mistake. If you feel like it'll help. And I'll go and get some orange. right colors in. And they might wrap around some of these tree shapes a little bit. That's okay. That may not physically be what happens, but it certainly felt that way in the moment. All right, some more yellow. Now, I'm going to set that aside. Grab this long hairbrush here, dip into our light blue, purplish color, and we're going to do the same thing. Oops, a little too dark, a little too saturated right now. This little stone there, Need a little dark gray mixed in. Green bottom. And I'm going to use that palette knife and mix some of our cad red and our raw sienna. I'm just going to, along some of the edges, maybe create the indication that, yeah, some of the light is hitting these tree branches. Just touches here and there. Raw sienna and orange. There we go. think we are going to call it a day. This little scene painted based upon the little painting based upon the scene that I walked by this morning while walking our dog. Alright, I think we're gonna call this one done. Hope you enjoyed. I know I had fun trying to recreate this scene that I saw while walking our dog Holly this morning.